Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Dreaming and Designing the IEP, sponsored by Peak Parent Center. I would like to introduce our presenter, Ann Wilson from Peak Parent Center.
Thank you, Erin. And thank you for viewing our webinar today, Dreaming and Designing the IEP. This webinar does not cover the basics about the IEP or the IEP meeting. So if you're looking for that information, we have recorded videos on our website that you can view. And we also have parent advisors who can answer your specific questions. And I'll have contact information for them at the end of the video. But as Erin said, my name is Ann Wilson, and I am on the staff at Peak Parent Center. I focus on transition and on dispute prevention in the IEP process. And I'm also a parent. And so I have been through the IEP process myself, and I will share some information of examples from my life for some of the slides. Also, if you aren't familiar with Peak Parent Center, we are the state of Colorado's Parent Training and Information Center. So we serve the entire state of Colorado. We're funded by the Office of Special Education Programs to support families as they navigate this process. We do not provide any legal services or legal advice, but we provide training and information such as this. I have a Google folder, and I'm going to put the link for that in the, whoops, sorry, I tried to put the link in the chat and just advance my slides. This QR code and the link here will give you access to a Google folder that includes the slides, as well as some handouts of some of the resources that I will mention. I'm trying something new. I've included a version of the slides that has the dark background. So if that works better for you, you can access that version as well. I always like to know who's in the audience. So if anyone wants to share, if they're a family member or professional, or and the age of the children, youth, young adults that they work with, that always helps to give some context. And as I mentioned, this is not about the basics of the IEP. This webinar is about making a vision for the future and then working to put your IEP in the context of that vision. And so it'll be in 4 sections. I'll starting with the vision. I will talk about becoming an expert on your child, because that's something you can really bring into the IEP meeting. Building that foundation for the future, and then understanding the role of the IEP and specifically how you might think about the IEP in the context of your long-term vision. So start with a vision. I have a friend and a mentor who always tells me to have a vision, because if you don't have a vision, someone else will make a vision for you. And I think that can happen to our kids with disabilities. So it's important to think about your vision from the beginning, or wherever you are. So I want to start thinking about expectations. An expectation is something that you think might happen in the future, or something that you think is possible for your child. And I encourage you to think about whether your expectations changed when you learned your child had a disability. I know that my expectations changed when I learned my child had a disability. And in some ways, it almost turned into almost a lack of expectations, because I wanted to be open-minded. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't want to hold my child back, but I also didn't want to expect too much. And so I took sort of a wait and see attitude, which in some ways, looking back, I wish I had higher expectations. And sometimes when we have a child with a disability, we might think about how can I support them to have a life that's as close to the life that kids without disabilities have. But sometimes that can be limiting, or sometimes we think only in terms of what we've seen. So think about how you might expand your vision of what is possible for your child or student to have their best life. And I like this image where we kind of, for all of us, whether we have a disability or not, is sometimes we think we need to be in a certain box. And sometimes when unexpected things happen, it gives us an opportunity to sort of expand our box. So think about how you might expand your vision to create the best life for your child. There are many visioning tools out there. Charting the Life course is one, and they have many tools. They have a website. There's a link at the end of on the resource page. And their vision is really that all people have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations, just as others do in the community. And I like this graphic because it's just simple, and it's really thinking about what do I not like in the present, and what do I like in the present, and what do I want to do? Which things do I want to have in the future, and which things do I want to work to not have in my future? And so I kind of like it as it's just simple and straightforward. But again, they have many tools, and there are also a lot of tools available on the internet. Keep in mind that your vision will evolve over time as the student learns and expands interests and you see more about their strengths and preferences, your vision can evolve. But remember that the vision is about hopes and dreams, not about the how or whether it seems achievable. And even I'm a parent of a student who's now in the 18 to 21 transition program. He has completed his requirements for graduation with a regular diploma, but he needs additional support, and IDEA provides that option. But when I look at where he is now, it's not it's far beyond what we would have thought he was going to do when we were in early intervention or when we were in the early elementary grades. So, you know, don't limit yourself to what you can imagine, because our kids will often surprise us. Think think about possibility and high expectations. Um, there are so many things changing in the world right now, and so there will be in the future different opportunities that we haven't even seen. There are new pathways and opportunities. And also we have the ability to shape how we design our life more than we have in the past. There is a lot of research about how high expectations are correlated with better outcomes. I have a reference to the Pacer Center, and that's also linked at the end. The Pacer Center is another parent training and information center in another state who does a lot of work on transition, and they just have a resource that sort of pulls together a lot of this research. But you can find it, you can get on Google Scholar and find all kinds of research related to expectations. I also like this quote because sometimes you might experience this. Don't assume that you know what the ceiling of a student's ability is going to be. Sometimes when we work through that IEP process, we're thinking about potential. And sometimes you might feel that there are some assumptions going on that are assuming that there's a ceiling. So we want to be mindful of that. The way we talk about things matters. And so really think about a positive vocabulary. You may have heard about a growth mindset. There's a lot of conversation about that these days. But the way we talk about our kids and the way we talk to them really matters in sort of how they think about themselves in the future. I like this quote that the way we talk to and about our children becomes their inner voice. And then also just sort of the way we talk about things becomes how we think about things and becomes what we do. Also speak to and about your child in terms of what is possible, not just is wrong. We all know that our kids hear a lot about what they need to work on, but also be specific about positive feedback. Give them descriptive information, let them know what they can work on. Sometimes I have experienced in my life just things like good job or things like that that sort of don't give them any information. And sometimes I've had them receive negative information that wasn't very specific either, like, well, you could have done a better job on it. And then they're very confused and might sit there and wonder how they could do a better job. Also, talk about working through challenges as a way toward growth. Sometimes when you're being evaluated a lot, you can start to fear making mistakes. So you want to make sure that that our kids understand that we all have challenges and we have to work through them to learn more. Reframing is a skill that we can use in a lot of ways. We talk about using this in IEP meetings. But reframing can set a more positive tone, or it could just even set a neutral tone, but it really gives you information about what to work on. And we can reframe things that we say, and we can also reframe things that we hear from others. Keeping in mind that, as Dr. Ross Green says, kids do well if they can. So really, we want to get that information that helps us figure out what they can do to handle a situation differently. So just a couple of examples. A negative description might be, this child is defiant and refuses to participate in free reading time. They don't try very hard. The reframe may be that this child needs literacy support. This might happen. A lot of kids in early elementary might experience something like that. Or you might hear something, this child doesn't wait their turn, they're rude and interrupt, and they bring up unnecessary information. Maybe that means that the child is enthusiastic and they make interesting connections. And what can we do with that? Maybe they need some support in skills for group participation. So think about ways you can reframe the messages you're hearing or ask for more information to get a better sense of what to work on. And as you think about your vision for the future, keep in mind that everyone can continue their education. There are a variety of programs, not just degrees. There are degrees, there are certificates, micro-credentials. There are a lot of opportunities now so that people can have a lower cost option to develop a job skill. Career and technical education is a good option, and you can start doing that in high school in a lot of schools. Students or individuals with disabilities can get accommodations in education as well as the workforce, which I'll talk about next. Some schools have a culture of inclusivity, and they'll provide supports beyond what is required. And then there are specialized programs, and these seem to be increasing. These are often require an additional fee, but you can have a program. I've seen a lot of these for students with learning disabilities or with students with autism. And if you're not aware of inclusive higher education, these programs allow students with intellectual disabilities to have a college experience. There are currently in this school year 4 in Colorado, but there are 2 more coming next year. Those are the logos on the right. There's Elevate at Arapahoe Community College, UCCS Inclusive Services, University of Northern Colorado Goal, and Regis University Global Inclusive Program. There are 2 more coming on next year, one at CSU and one at Metro State University in Denver. We have an organization in Colorado called IN with an exclamation point, and they have a lot of information about the programs, and they sort of are the ones that coordinate the new programs. So I believe there's a link for them at the end as well. Also, everyone can work. Colorado is an employment first state, and so that is sort of the preferred first option that we want to think about for all students. Students who can perform the essential functions of the job with accommodations are entitled to receive those accommodations, and there's a process to work through that. For people who need additional support and more ongoing support, there are options for supported employment and customized employment. And in addition, people often find self-employment to be an option that works if they need more flexibility. Individuals with disabilities are involved in self-employment at a higher rate than individuals without disabilities. And part of that, I think, is because of the flexibility that it allows. So as you move forward through this process, remember that families really are the stewards of the vision, because families are the consistent participant through all the school years. Each year you may have a different team and you might change schools. And so you really have that role of making sure the team sees the child as the unique individual as they are, and that the team's aware of the family's history and vision. Sometimes our school teams are working with a lot of people, and sometimes, you kind of take a pause and remind them of things about your child. So that's really the section about make sure that you have a vision, know that it can change over time, and it doesn't have to be something that you can see your child doing at that time. Next, I want to talk about becoming an expert on your child. Parents are team members as part of the IEP process, and an important part of that role is really being an expert on your child. So don't let the diagnosis define what's possible for your child. Diagnostic tests don't provide the total picture. And when we're looking at educational evaluations, remember we're focused on the educational environment and the ability of the student to be involved and make progress in the general education curriculum. You, as a parent, can provide information that fills in gaps in what the team at school is seeing. We've had at Peak, we have a conference that has speakers about inclusive education. And I remember long ago someone saying that, our kids don't show their knowledge when we're asking them to. They show it when it's the right time for them. And so you might have your child or student not do something when you're asking them or in the time of the assessment, but then you might go home and they'll do something that actually shows they have that knowledge. So be looking for those opportunities. I have a child who has a very slow processing speed. And so sometimes they'll answer a question, hours or even days later. So take note of those things. I'm not very good at capturing notes, but it's good to have those examples and to be able to share them with the school team. We can also learn a lot from the school team because of their experience dealing with so many different types of students and circumstances. Remember that behavior is communication. Um, Again, we want to think about what's going on under the surface. What is this behavior telling us? What is our child trying to communicate with us? So oftentimes it's an issue of lagging skills. So maybe we can identify what the lagging skills are. At least for me, my child experiences a lot of stress and uncertainty at school. And so I think everything they see about my child at school is him in a bit of a state of stress. And so I like to let them know how he is when he's in a situation where he feels relaxed, because I don't think that happens at school. So, just do what you can to understand and try and figure out what's going on when and what might be the causes. I'd like to emphasize the importance that we don't forget about enrichment. I found in my experience that sometimes my student with the disability doesn't have as many opportunities for enrichment. And there are always so many things to work on that we can get focused on intervention and sort of think that we don't have time for enrichment. But that enrichment is really helpful in helping them learn their interests and finding what they want to work on. And a lot of that information becomes really important when you start planning for transition. So don't neglect enrichment. This is sort of a paraphrase as a quote, but I like this. Is from Hari Srinivasan. If you're not familiar with him, you could Google him. He writes interesting things and has a very insightful perspective. But he says, as you think about goals for independence, recognize that the nature of disability may mean that some will need degrees of support in different areas at different points in their lives, or maybe even all their lives. So sometimes in the process, we feel like we need to work on this, we need to get this, we need to get this. And sometimes you have to kind of step back and prioritize. And there's some things that I've been surprised that I'm surprised that they need support doing this, but I have to kind of recognize that I'm not them. I don't understand. And so sometimes there are things that, even if it may surprise me, that's something they're going to need ongoing support with. So when you're developing this expertise on your child, how can you communicate that to your IEP team? So I'm just going to highlight a couple of advocacy tools that you can use. But again, there are many of these, or you can create your own. The point is that you want to help the team see your child as the individual that they are. And for me, I just had my IEP meeting, my child's IEP meeting last week. So, this is almost the end of the school year. So a lot of times you kind of come into a new team and you won't have that opportunity to meet with the IEP team till later. So sometimes you can share something that gives them more of a brief description of what's really important to you and what you really want them to see. So also, if you start early and do this, or whenever you start, it can also be a process of updating year by year to really help your child develop self-awareness. They'll be asked a lot about themselves later on and have to be able to speak about what support needs they have. And so if you kind of revisit these conversations, that can be helpful for the future. So the first tool I want to mention is a one-page profile. You can find a lot of examples about this, and I do have a link to Fact Oregon, another parent center who has a nice page about these. But they can just highlight key information that you want the school team to know. Sometimes I'll talk to parents and they'll say, they just don't see this about my child. And then think about, well, have you communicated that? And sometimes we communicate by just telling them something, but if we find ways to show it to them or give them examples, that can help them sort of absorb it more. Another example is Shelley Moore's seed packet. And Shelley Moore is from Canada, and she has done a lot of research and she does a lot of work to promote inclusive education. I like her seed packet. She has the video series called 5 More Minutes, and I have a link to that in the future in the resource page. But she was talking about how when you have a plant that's not growing, you try and figure out what you can do to help it grow, because you can't really change the plant. And so she was using that example of how the seed packet gives these introductions, and she shared this that you could use to talk about your child or help them talk about themselves. And then she also created her own. So this is something that we could all use. So then when you've got that knowledge, we want to make sure we're building that foundation for the future. The time goes quickly. Even though it seems like a long time, I have this image of you start at pre-K, and I like to think of each annual IEP as a building block as you're working toward the end of IDEA. When you either graduate from high school or reach age 21, IDE no longer applies. That it's for public education through that age, and then it's done. And the bigger picture goal is to prepare students for further education, employment, and independent living. So think about each of your building blocks with that perspective, as that's what you're looking for at the end of this, which also sort of highlights what the focus of IDEA is. It's not, we want your child to have the best possible life. So we can do things outside of the process that really support the process. I have this triangle of family and relationships. That's something we want, they're going to need throughout their life. And a lot of research on quality of life, that really relationships is the most important. So we want to be building those, and also increasing community participation as we reach that end, where many people refer to it as the cliff or other terms. And so we want to try and make that transition when they leave school. We don't want school to be everything, or that transition becomes harder. So what can you build as you go along to make that transition more gentle? I'm just going to highlight some things to think about. You can think about community relationships. We like to think about natural supports. Those are just the supports that are out there in the community. We may, as you get older, sometimes it's harder to find those natural supports. And so sometimes we start to think about disability supports first, but just keep your mind open to natural supports. We've, in our family, had great experience with people in the community who are very welcoming and supportive and really are open to working with our child. Also think about exposure to different activities, because you're always trying to get a better understanding of what interests and things the student or child gets excited about. And mentorship can be great. Anyone who can sort of mentor within those areas of interest can be really helpful. Like if you are interested in art, maybe finding an art mentor or a music mentor. Parents can really be parents and other family members can be a bridge to the community, because sometimes you just need to make those connections and sort of help facilitate them, and then see in what ways can you step back and let that relationship develop on its own. Also, model communication. If you have a child who struggles with communication, sometimes people in the community might not be familiar with how to interact with them. So sometimes you can model how to communicate, and again, do what you can to sort of facilitate that connection, and then maybe step back and see if you can let that build on its own. Also, the least restrictive environment. You should be familiar with the least restrictive environment from the IEP process, but it's generally that idea that we want students with disabilities to be educated with students without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. But it's not just about school. We want to think about that throughout the lifetime. For example, thinking about what decision-making options you might consider. Guardianship or conservatorship are more restrictive, and there are more options like supported decision-making that are less restrictive. So you want to learn what you can and then figure out what works best for you. So think about increasing the individual's voice and choice over time, and also think about where the individual spends their time and receives services, and think about, don't always immediately go for the disability specific option. So just kind of explore and be open to possibilities again. We talk a lot about self-determination with kids with disabilities, because they often, research shows that that kids with disabilities may not develop self-determination as much as kids without disabilities. So it's something that we need to pay attention to and make sure we're giving opportunities to develop these skills. And you can start at very young ages developing the foundational skills of making choices, expressing preferences, solving problems, setting and reaching goals, self-regulation, and then self-awareness and self-knowledge. And then you want to work to refine those skills in adolescence and sort of leveling up as much as you can. These are just some examples for building self-determination. I wanted to find an example from research. And so from even the young ages at pre-K and kindergarten, you can give opportunities for choice making, or for thinking about making decisions, such as, do you want this or that for lunch? We're going to go to the pool. What do we need to bring? We're going to go on a picnic. What should we pack? In elementary school, expand opportunities and provide strategies to discover what work habits and learning strategies work for them. So even as when you're studying for your spelling test, does it help to write the words down? Does it help to spell them out loud? Do you like flashcards? Does it help to have pictures? Just so they can really start developing an understanding of what helps their learning. And if something goes better one time, you can say, that assignment went well. What did you do differently this time? Provide opportunities for real experience. Again, there's research that those real experiences can be very helpful for learning versus simulated experiences. But when you're with your child at home, there's these 4 steps for raising adults for any child. You can start with doing it for them, but you want to work toward doing it with them, trying to then get to watching them do it, and then they can do it on their own. And some of these phases may take a very long time, but you want to try and be working on these skills. Starting early is great, because a lot of times that's when kids are more enthusiastic about spending time with us and doing those things. And if you wait till later, sometimes there can be a little more resistance. Explore and support interests. Again, that really helps build self-awareness and helps you understand what you might want to add to your vision. So then we get to the role of the IEP. So once we've created this vision, how do we think about our IEP in the context of this? So I want to just highlight some IEP principles, not getting into the details, but this is an image that I like. It's from the Colorado Department of Education's Alternative Dispute Resolution Project. And it gives a diagram of sort of the steps, big picture steps in the IEP process. It always starts with an evaluation. That's how you become eligible. You have a reevaluation every 3 years. And every year we're really looking at evaluation data. And you use that information to develop the present levels and needs, which I'll talk about more. And then we develop those measurable goals. Then we figure out the services in the LRE, including accommodations and modifications. And this is all to work toward educational benefit. As I mentioned, the bigger picture objectives of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is to eligible students are entitled to a free, appropriate public education, FAPE, to prepare the student for further education, employment, and independent living. So that's what I had at the end of that. At the end of these IEP process, we want to be prepared for those things. And the students should be prepared to lead productive and independent adult lives to the maximum extent possible. I just want to mention the FAPE standard. We have the law, and then we have the interpretation of the law. So we have 2 Supreme Court cases on the standard for FAPE. One was in 1982, and that was a case called Rowley, and they stated a 2-part test. First, looking at the procedural requirements, has the school boards or school district complied with the procedural requirements of IDEA? That means have they met the deadlines? Have they done progress monitoring? Have they done the specific things they need to do? And that's much easier to evaluate. And then the second part is the substantive, which is the IEP developed through the IDEA's procedures reasonably calculated to enable the child to receive educational benefit? So this is why we're working toward educational benefit. And this is a little different than once you move beyond public education, it's more about access than benefit. Then in 2017, there was another Supreme Court that really sort of clarified or refined the standard to give more information. There were some places interpreting it, some courts interpreting it as merely more than de minimis benefit was enough for students that didn't just progress grade to grade. And it was actually the 10th Circuit where Colorado is located. And then the Supreme Court rejected that standard. And so this is just some of the language in their holding. They said that the IEP must be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So the child's circumstances is really important. And they said that every child should have the chance to meet challenging objectives. And so that's something to really think about as a parent is, are the objectives that you're thinking about challenging? And then the adequacy of any IEP turns on the unique circumstances of the child for whom it was created. The IDEA requires that multidisciplinary team-based approach to assess strengths and needs and develop the IEP. And each team member brings important information to the meeting. And that's why, as a parent, it's so important to have that deep understanding of your child. And then each person's information adds to the team's understanding of the students and what services the student needs. Sometimes this process can lead to disagreement and conflict, but it's really important because that really trying to understand what everyone's saying can lead to the best results. And that's why they use that multidisciplinary team. So when you're thinking about your annual IEP, which is just your plan for the coming year, you always zoom into the present levels. So you're looking at where is the child now, what's that baseline, and then you determine the goals for the coming year. So those are time limited, but you want those time-limited plans to be building toward your future goals. The IDEA requires a statement of the student's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So that's a section of your IEP. It's sometimes called the PLAF, PLAAFP. Sometimes people call it the PLOP. It used to be, in some states, it's present levels of performance. But in general, that describes how the student's disability affects the child's involvement and progress in the general curriculum. And again, in your IEP meeting, you're just thinking, what's our priority for the coming year? But that's why you want to make sure you're building with each IEP. So take time to zoom out, to make sure that the goals align with your vision, that they align with who your child is. So think about, would I need a goal that supports my vision, or is there something that we might want to add? For example, self-determination, if that's an area of concern, communication, looking for communication in different types of settings, community participation, maybe supported decision-making. Think about how you can work in participation in activities for all students, especially if you have a student who's not participating in the general education classroom. And look ahead to what skills will be needed in the future. For example, and I use this example because I'm hearing a lot about students not having some of these skills when they're reaching transition age. For example, demonstrating increased independence or success in electronic communication. When you go to post-secondary education or to the workplace, you often need to be communicating by email. So that's a skill to develop if you can. I have a link to a resource here called IEP Goal Ideas to Support Post-Secondary Education. This is a resource from Think College, which is the national organization for the inclusive higher education programs. But it's a great resource just to scan, to look at the goal ideas, to think about, we're good here. Oh, we might need to work on this. So check out that link. And then think about if there's a way you can work with your goals to support for future skill building. For example, speech, language, or communication goals will often do this. They might specify a particular environment or multiple settings. These kind of goals would be aligned with the Colorado academic standards for reading, writing, and communicating. So think about, is there a way to provide opportunities for incidental learning? Maybe you might have a language goal that involves expressing opinions outside the classroom or finding context clues in the natural environment. So ways to sort of get your goal a little more focused to align with your future goals. Maybe to experience the culture, rhythm, and patterns of the school if they're not getting that opportunity. Another thing that I'm seeing more now are strength-based IEP goals. And this is sort of incorporating the students' abilities into the goals. I have not done this myself, but so I highlighted this article from Understood, which is an organization, a national organization that does a lot related to learning disabilities, and they have an article on strength-based IEPs. So this is an example from their article. You might have had a SMART goal that said, Sam will learn the class vocabulary words with 90% accuracy in 3 out of 4 weekly opportunities. And to change that to a strength-based goal, they would say, Sam will use his creativity and interpersonal skills to develop and lead his peers in a class vocabulary game with 90% accuracy in 3 out of 4 weekly opportunities. So you've got to be, working with your team to figure out what can we do and what works, but just this idea of thinking about how to incorporate strengths is interesting to me. Then I want to talk about beyond the IEP. I think, as I mentioned, you want to be building those relationships and those foundations and opportunities for community participation. Many IEP post-secondary goals are oriented toward being able to work. And so you want to think about what other things are important to your family and to the individual. I highlight, these 4 areas of life from Designing Your Life, which is a book, but they talk about play, work, love, and health. And so think about, the IEP kind of has a more focused purpose, but these other areas are very important for success and for, feeling good about life. So think about what can we do beyond the IEP to work toward um, that good life. Sometimes when we talk about doing enrichment or things, sometimes people feel like they don't have the time or they don't have the money for, to pay for special lessons or anything. And so I want to highlight positive child experiences. These are research based and they're sort of indicators of healthy outcomes from positive experience called HOPE. There's a link to the organization, but they identified these positive child experiences that can really make a difference in outcomes. And some of these are easy to do. So something that's really important is being able to talk with family about feeling supported by family during difficult times. I found that to be really important for, at least in my family, to get through college and sometimes to get through work stress. And then just enjoying participation in community traditions. Some of these we have less control over, such as a sense of belonging in high school or feeling supported by friends. They also say having at least 2 non-parent adults who genuinely cared, and then feeling safe and protected by an adult in the home. So these are just some things that you can think about how you're doing things that might help to improve those outcomes beyond school. So think about shaping the narrative. Like say, you want to be collaborating with your team to develop these goals, but think about what can you show the team that they may not be seeing. Or sometimes if the team is seeing something, you might have information or examples that counterbalance that information. So really think about if you feel like they're not seeing your child the way you would like them to, what input can you provide that might shape that narrative? Sometimes we focus on telling, but thinking about ways to show can be really helpful. So in conclusion, just key takeaways: develop a vision of the future that you want for your child. And then as they grow, you of course want them to be participating in that vision and, sharing their views and helping them develop their vision. Build your way forward. It really does take building all along the way. Learn from your child. I sometimes get my best information, and I meant to say this earlier, but I forgot that I had this example where I was trying to be supportive, and my my child failed a test and felt really bad about it, and I was saying, I know, I think you wanted, I know that you wanted to pass that test, and he turned to me and he said, Mom, I didn't want to pass the test. I wanted to get the top score on the test, and it really was eye-opening to me that I was demonstrating low expectations. Like I didn't even think that was possible. I was just like, let's just try and get up to the next thing. And so it really changed how I approached things with him because he told me that. And I tried to learn that, like, even though he's struggling in all these ways and he's here, he wants to be here. And so how can we support him to get as close to where he wants to be as we can? Also use that positive language, build a foundation for the future outside of school, and then provide input to the IEP that helps align goals with your future vision. This is the contact information for our parent advisors. As I mentioned, this is a great resource. You can have conversations, you can have email exchange. Anything you want to know specific to your situation, you can call them and talk to them. So it's a great resource. Please share this with friends and take advantage of it. This is the additional resource pages. There's some great information here to get more information about the IEP process and kind of future planning. And then I also want to mention we have some upcoming webinars starting next week that are focused on family engagement and collaboration in the IEP process. And that is the end of my presentation. So we thank you for participating and listening, and I hope you received some good information. Erin, do you have any closing